Hello and welcome to another video. This video is going to be a little bit longer than the other ones because there's a lot of stuff that I need to cover. First thing I want to say, you can go mitigation stats, but the reason why I don't go mitigation stats is because the damage on Juggernaut tank is very high. Its burst damage is very high, and on top of that, a lot of the mitigation stats that you get for free suffice, but also at the same time, mitigation stats do not work against internal damage like Thundering Blast, and there's many others that I could list, but we'd go on for way too long. So the damage that's going to kill you anyway, you cannot mitigate. So it's better to focus on doing damage, doing pressure, and trying to play smarter rather than just face stinking damage. Also, having another person that can taunt in your group can really help alleviate tank tunnel. So getting into it, we're using basically the implants that you would use as Juggernaut DPS. So critical chance on enrage, and then 10% damage whenever you use a rage spinning for melee damage. Because pretty much everything we do is melee damage except for choke and backhand. Our stats look a little bit different, and that's because Juggernaut tank, for some reason, or I guess all tanks, get 4 more mastery and 4 more endurance than everybody else. I assume that's a syncing issue because tank gear is a little bit different than DPS gear. So the sync is probably just messed up a little bit for them. Though 4 endurance and 4 mastery doesn't really make much of a difference. It's like a difference of having 1 datacron for each one. But that is why it looks different. So basically we're running 4 alacrity plus 1 augment. You could forgo the augment if you want to. I just do it for smoother animations because it's personal preference. This is one of the classes that actually takes advantage of having slightly higher alacrity to smoothen everything out. And then pretty much everything else is critical because our critical rate isn't very good, and 5k does seem like, hey, we're going a little bit over the DR, but the only thing that you could actually put those stats into is defense chance. That would be useful. And you would go around 4k crit. However, I find the critical chance just being better because really around 69% is where you start hitting the point where critical is not really worth it anymore. But do take it with a grain of salt. You can do what you want, you can try what you want, you can test what you want. But this is what I would recommend. And going into our talent tree, I would recommend through passion, which is the reduce cooldown on enraged defense instead of pooled hatred. The only reason I take pooled hatred is because I'm very experienced on Juggernaut, and I understand how to not take unnecessary damage. And doing more damage generally just means bigger burst windows and just being able to shut down people a lot more because you're able to do a lot more pressure. So therefore, people take less damage. So for example, if I'm getting like 5 stacks of pooled hatred and I have my combo up, chances are I'm going to hit somebody for over 100,000 in my combo. My cushion blow alone is probably going to hit like 90 to 100,000, and then the rest of my build is going to do like 40k. That's a lot of damage for somebody to take, and most classes can't just take that and be okay. They'll have to do something or pop a defensive or run away. So personally, that's what I would prefer. However, when you're still learning, I highly recommend taking passion just because of the cooldown reduction on enraged defense. Allows you to survive longer, and it also just allows for more durability, which is good. Because if you don't know how to kite, you will get in more trouble, I guess you could say. But if you know how to kite, it's okay, but not all the time that you want to kite. Then I would virtually never recommend taking the Smash Flow. It's kind of interesting, but it's really not worth it. You can take Fear, Reflect, or Mad Dash. Either of them work. Personally, I don't really care too much. Sometimes I'll take Reflect against heavy yellow damage. Sometimes I'll take AoE Mez if our composition can benefit from it. I pretty much always take the CC immunity on Leap now because it's very, very, very strong. Then I also take basically Warbringer, which now gives us Dispatch / Vicious Throw on Leap. That's pretty nice. And then for the other two, they're pretty much mandatory. The taunt damage is insane. It does a lot of damage. 50% is absolutely crazy. I have no idea what they were thinking. 50% is way overboard and it's way overkill. It's way too much damage. If anything, it should be 20%, much in line like Assassin or buff Assassin. You know, Assassin's not doing well. Then the other talent that is semi-useful is if you take the cooldown reduction on Crushing Blow when you critically hit. With it, I believe that one is pretty good. The reason why that one is good is because you can pair it with Leviathan's Hide. That means that you can keep Leviathan's Hide up pretty much permanently and cleave, so you can get that extra 20% DR. And then on top of that, you can also just have more cleave, which is generally useful if you're in a situation where you can take advantage of that. This will put you, instead of at 44% DR, this will put you around 60%, 50 to 60% DR pretty much at all times. That's quite a bit of DR, and if somebody throws an AoE taunt, you're going to be super dinky. But definitely don't mistake it for Immortality, because it most definitely is not. You can still die pretty easily against the right specs and against the right people that know how to use the burst. Especially if you take heavy focus from majority of a team. Certain specs are really good at just killing tanks, like internal damage, like Thundering Blast. You can take Ravage Root. I highly recommend taking Ravage Root. The reason why I take Sweeping Slash is because I'm more used to it, but sometimes I'll take Ravage Root. It really depends on our composition. If I'm needing to cleave, which last time I played, I was needing to cleave, so Sweeping Slash also applies to accuracy debuffs, so does Smash. So if anybody wanted to purge my debuff, I could immediately reapply with Sweeping Slash, which is nice. It's also decent damage, and it's usually your filler when you're waiting for your combo instead of just using Slash, because usually you just use Slash. If you're using Ravage Root, you will just use Slash. And you can use any of the bottom tier, the first three selections, you can use any of these, they're all okay. I like the barrier for your team because it gives them a little extra survivability. And the gain from the other ones are just so small that I see it as not important. Now, going into our tacticals, as I said before, Leviathan's Hide does have synergy with the cooldown reduction Crushing Blow. Overwhelming Offense is the go-to damage increase implant tactical. And then Grit Teeth is really good against white damage players. So if there's a lot of Carnage Marauders in queue, a lot of Arsenal or a lot of like snipers, Grit Teeth will end up being higher value for a defensive tactical if you want to take one. The number one thing that you always want to worry about going into doing damage or playing, I guess you could say, is guard. Who are you guarding? Are you staying within guard range? Are they kiting out of your guard range? It's very important. When you're guarding a range and they're taking damage from another range, and if you cannot hit them and you're just stuck by them, it's a bad position for you. Personally, you should either get the range to move closer, but most of the time that's not doable. If they don't have melee, they should probably look into honest siding while you go help the melee that probably is hitting them or could hit them. You basically always want to be within range of the person that you're guarding and guard people who are in trouble. Don't guard people that are full health and they have a defensive going, because that's completely redundant. The only reason you would ever want to do that is if you know they're 100% about to get swapped on. And even then, just try to be aware. Whoever's taking damage, you want to make sure that they have guard. And people will swap off immediately as they get guard, so you want to make sure and be looking out for who's taking damage. A good example of tanking well is having debuff icons on, so you can see when somebody gets a thermal detonator or assault plastique on them. And then you can just guard for that thermal detonator so it does less damage. When thermal detonator is about to go off on somebody, usually they'll be followed by more damage. Combination of guard and taunts, you apply a lot of damage reduction, a lot of survivability to your team, but also you have intercede to throw on top of that. Not necessarily do you always want to intercede the guarded target. Sometimes it's probably a good idea if they're very much so big danger. However, you can even pre-intercede before somebody's about to jump in or get into combat, just like a second before they do it, just so they can have the damage reduction rolling and you can have the cooldown rolling. So for next time they use it, they won't just be immediately off cooldown, it'll be coming off cooldown. Overall, it's just something that you want to use as extra damage reduction. Maybe somebody's taking damage, but they're not a priority for you to guard. Let's say they're just taking like dot damage or AoE damage, you can't necessarily guard them because somebody's getting bursted down. Use Intercede as that tool to answer to that on top of taunts. Between taunts, Intercede, and guard, you can kind of keep two people safe at the same time, which is a unique circumstance. Going into our main combo here is usually, obviously, you're going to leap in. You need to get Aegis Assault going, and the reason why you need Aegis Assault going is so your Crushing Blow can be AoE, but also at the same time, it'll give you some warding for your allies if you take the talent that I do. Then it also gives you some like miscellaneous, I think, damage reduction if you take the talent too. It's like 2% or something if you wanted to take that. I don't personally find that to be too useful. I think the little barrier for your allies is a little bit better. If you're using overwhelming offense, I would recommend opening with that into Ravage so you can get stacks for overwhelming offense. So then when you go into your main combo, you can do a little bit more. So if you're going to get an AoE Crushing Blow here, I would probably recommend just backhanding the target just to be safe, to make sure that you don't miss your Crushing Blow, taunt them, then use your Enrage, so then you can get to 20% crit, and then use Crushing Blow. This is all off the global cooldown besides backhand, so you would taunt first, Enrage, and then Crushing Blow. So that'll do damage. And another combo that you can do, if you know there's stealthers nearby, you can run where you think the stealthers are, hit AoE taunt. If it puts you in combat, just hit Enrage. If you hit Enrage, that'll then pull them out of combat because it's a yellow damage thing that goes off when you hit Enrage. If they have a taunt on them, they'll get hit by it. So even if they're in a stealth, they'll get pulled out. Now, I would highly recommend putting these binds in a comfortable spot: Enrage, Taunt, Crushing Blow, and Retaliation, because all these buttons can be hit pretty much at the same time. You do want to do them in order, but you pretty much hit them all at the same time. Then you would follow into Vicious, Scream, and Smash, and then you could either do Slash or Vicious Slash. Vicious Slash or Sweeping Slash, my bad. And then Assault, you usually only do that if you need Rage to continue doing either single target AoE, but most of the time you will have Rage, and you can always just make sure that you keep leaping so you can be CC immune and knockback immune. That'll really help you too, and it also will build Rage. But that's your main combo. Your main concern should be taunting, CCing, controlling people. Especially if you're taking Ravage route, really, really can control people. Sorry, stumbling over my words here. There's just a lot you can do. There's a lot of control. This class is a bully. You have Force Push, you have Backhand, you have Choke. If you take Ravage route, you have that too. There's a lot of stuff that you can do that makes sure that people can't do what they want to. Then we go into our DCDs. We have Saberboard, we have Invincible, Endure Pain, and Enraged Defense. So your lowest cooldown will be Endure Pain. Your best defensive will be Invincible. Your second best will be Saberboard. And then you also have Enraged Defense, which is basically a heal to full. However, if you're really close to dying and you don't have any DR going, if you pop Enraged Defense, you can die through it. So just try not to grief yourself like that. Maybe have like a journal, like Warzone journal going at the same time when you pop ED if you're popping it pretty low. Or even Reflect if you decide to take that over Mad Dash, or maybe Mad Dash into ED. It's definitely something to think about. So as for like defensive management, whenever you're taking massive damage, or your team's taking massive damage, or there's cleave that you just can't get out of, or you're just not able to get out of, that's when I recommend popping Invincible. It'll be much better than other things. When you're white barred and there's like a decent amount of white damage going, or you're able to spam leap as much as you want, I would recommend using Saberboard because it'll save you from a lot of white damage, especially if your ally is getting massacred a lot. And I mean by the ability Massacre, or Brazen Bolts and stuff like that do white damage. That'll help you mitigate the damage that's getting split to you. Then you also have Endure Pain. This lasts for 20 seconds. Doesn't really give you anything else. It's just an extra bit of health for 20 seconds. When it falls off and you're still low, you're probably going to die. So you usually want to have it with some sort of healing, or some sort of incoming healing, to make sure that you don't die with it. There's not really anything special to the defensives. You just have to get used to like using them. You want to spread them apart. You don't want to use them all at the same time. And typically you can have enraged defense up a decent amount of the time. Not always when you're taking heavy focus will you have enraged defense, but definitely a lot tankier than pretty much everybody else. There's not really anything else crazy to go over on this sheet. We'll go into game. I want to show you a couple things. So to give you a quick example of like kind of like the burst opener if you were to run overwhelming offense, which I am here. So I'm going to saber throw just for the rage. So during assault, or basically the equivalent of that. So you can see it does a lot of damage. I didn't crit everything, but for the most part, its damage is crazy. You can go mitigation gear, and that damage kind of evaporates. And also your survivability kind of evaporates too, in my opinion, because you're not going to do any damage, and those people are going to be able to free cast on you all day. If you do want to go any sort of mitigation, I think the only mitigation that might be worth it is to give up like one of your relics for a tanking relic, because tanking relics actually do make quite a bit of difference. I would never really recommend running a shield unless you are super confident in your healer, but it's arguably not worth it. You still hit about 100k maximum with crushing blow, so try again, see if we can hit that 100k while I'm recording at least. No, I hit a 95 again, but at least we crit like pretty much everything. It's a lot of damage to take. Even with a shield, like that's a lot. With a focus, you could probably guarantee those hundreds, but it's not really worth it. And this, by the way, is a level 10 dummy, so this is pretty much max hits. This is what you would hit on a very squishy target. So don't expect that on people that are actually using their brain, using their defenses, using their damage reduction and stuff like that. Now to show you guard range and how it works. So if I go too far out of range, there'll be a buff, this blue buff right here. It says out of range. So whenever you are out of range, he will no longer have guard basically. And when I get closer, this icon will disappear and he'll have guard once again. It's a little finicky, and in some areas where there's elevation, like up and down, especially like Tatooine Canyon, the little like sand dune that goes up to the circle. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. As soon as you get into Tatooine, most people will fight on the like little sand dune that's coming up. That there's actually like a guard bug with elevation, which will act as more distance, like the up and down will actually add more distance to the guard, and it'll consider it out of range. So that's not the only case in arenas, and it's not the only case in war zones either. This happens everywhere. Every time there's this, I guess you could call it elevation, which sucks. And it's something that'll probably never get fixed. So just keep that in mind. You might actually need to get closer than what it looks like. Because if I was down like 10 meters, he would be pretty close to being out of guard range. Another thing to keep in mind is when you force push or get force push, your reaction might be to mad dash right away, but you don't want to do that. And wait until your character gets all the way up fully, because if you don't wait for your character to get all the way up, you will actually get stuck and you'll rubber band and you'll mad dash in place. That's another thing that you should really know. Playing against a jug and just playing as a jug, since jug is just really good. You're probably going to play against other jug tanks. You really want to know that. Then can't really think of anything else off the top of my head. So I think I will stop it here. We already are almost 20 minutes, and this is supposed to be a quick guide. There's just a lot to unpack to tanking. I haven't covered tanking completely, and I thought about doing a tanking, like a purely tanking video, but I realized that that might be a waste of my time, I think. And just doing a Juggernaut guide and just adding as much information as I can in it would probably be far more useful. So that's what I ended up doing. If you guys take anything away from this or you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be more than happy to help. Also, as for grenades, I wouldn't recommend using a fire grenade. I just haven't played this character in a long time. Normally I would use like a stun grenade or a seismic grenade if you're going to use them. Then people get upset, oh, you're using grenades and regs. I mean, you're kind of just using everything that's available to you. It's much like people that are play, taunt stun AP, EA, it's in the game, they say. So, yeah, I don't like that. I wish it was removed, but there's nothing you can do about it. Grenades, I don't feel like is anywhere near as annoying as like spamming lightning sorcerer or taunt stun. Ooh, I wish that was removed. Anyway, again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to help. Other than that, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day or night.